Imagine for a second, right, that you're just sitting in your apartment. You order some late-night food on your phone, completely routine stuff.
Yeah, totally normal evening.
Exactly. But the next morning, there's a knock at your door. The secret police are standing there, holding a warrant for your arrest. And the only reason they found you is because they used the GPS data from that food delivery app to place you near a protest the day before.
Which just sounds like something out of a dystopian science fiction movie, honestly.
It really does. But that is the actual documented reality for many activists in Iran today.
It completely shatters the illusion we've built up over, the last 15 years about what the internet is supposed to be.
It does. And if you're a lifelong learner, you've probably heard the phrases like Twitter revolution or Facebook revolution thrown around. Usually it's painted with this incredibly optimistic brush.
Right, this whole idea that if you just give people smartphones and a Wi-Fi connection, democracy will just naturally, inevitably bloom.
Like, give the people an app and they'll topple a dictator.
It's an incredibly comforting narrative, but when you look at the raw data, that techno-utopian dream rarely survives contact with reality.
Which is exactly why we are unpacking this today. Welcome to our deep dive into the sources. We're looking at the dualistic impact of social media on political landscapes, and we have a laser focus today on Iran's democratic transitions, spanning from the 2009 protests all the way through to the massive unrest in early 2026.
And it's a timeline that basically serves as a masterclass in how information warfare has evolved right alongside the modern internet.
Yeah. So our mission today is to be your shortcut to being well-informed. We are synthesizing a massive stack of source materials for you.
Yeah.
We've got academic papers, UK government policy notes, military college research, deep regional analyses.
That's a heavy reading.
A ton of heavy reading. But we want to understand how digital platforms serve as both a tool for liberation and, paradoxically, this highly sophisticated instrument of state control.
And before we get into the mechanics of all this, there is a crucial caveat we really need to establish. The documents we are analyzing deal with highly charged political content.
Definitely.
Authoritarian regimes, civil unrest, state surveillance. It's heavy stuff.
Right, which makes this a mandatory point for us. We want to be explicitly clear with you, the listener, that we are not taking any political sides here. We aren't endorsing any ideology or movement, left or right.
Absolutely not.
Our goal is strictly and impartially to analyze the factual information and the viewpoints presented in these original source documents. We're just looking under the hood to see how this digital tug-of-war actually works.
So let's unpack this. If we go back to the early days of social media, there was this massive wave of optimism.
Oh, huge. I remember it.
Yeah, around the 2011 Arab Spring, social media was being hailed globally as liberation technology. And there was actually a factual, measurable basis for that early excitement.
I mean, the numbers support it, right?
They do. Take Tunisia, for example. The data shows that Facebook users there jumped from a mere 28,000 in 2008 to 2 million by 2011.
Wow. That is the definition of a critical mass.
Exactly. It fundamentally changed the physics of information in the country. So when a fruit vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi tragically self-immolated in protest against police corruption, that act was filmed and amplified across this newly massive digital network.
It went everywhere instantly.
Right. But the crucial detail in the research is that a nearly identical incident had actually happened in the Tunisian town of Monastir months earlier.
Wait, really? A similar protest happened earlier?
Yes. But the difference was that nobody filmed it, nobody shared it. So it went completely unnoticed by the wider public.
Wow. So the network effect really was the match that lit the powder keg there.
It was. But then we have to shift our focus to Iran's 2009 Green Movement, which was sparked by the contested re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
Yeah, I remember the Western press aggressively dubbing that a Twitter revolution. It was all over the news.
It was the defining narrative. But the research we're looking at reveals a wildly different reality on the ground. The statistics are actually staggering when you look back at them.
Okay, lay them on me.
In May 2009, there were only about 8,654 Twitter users in all of Iran.
Wait, out of a population of what, over 70 million at the time?
Over 70 million.
That's practically zero.
It gets even more narrow. 93% of those 8,654 users were located solely in the capital city, Tehran.
That is insane. So the narrative of this nationwide grassroots uprising fueled entirely by Twitter was basically a statistical myth.
Completely. It was generated by Western observers who were watching a tiny, highly vocal minority and just projecting that onto the whole country.
It feels like we treat a platform like Twitter as if it's the revolution itself. But it's really just a megaphone.
That's a good way to put it.
Like if you hand a megaphone to a crowd, it amplifies their voice, sure. But it doesn't write the speech. It doesn't magically organize them or tell them where to march.
Right. And the analysis points out that while Egyptian activists in the Arab Spring successfully used social media for framing narratives like building the We Are All Khaled Said Facebook page to create this unified master narrative, Iranian protesters in 2009 were mostly just using Twitter for basic low-level organizing.
So just sending short logistical texts about what street corner to meet at?
Pretty much, just logistics. Which leads to a fascinating and honestly somewhat tragic psychological phenomenon the academic literature calls slacktivism, or free writing.
Oh man, I am so guilty of this. It's when you feel like you're changing the world just by hitting retweet on a hashtag, right?
That is the exact mechanism. Psychologically, when you share a post expressing outrage or solidarity, your brain releases dopamine.
You get that rush of moral accomplishment.
Exactly. You feel like you've contributed to the cause. But in reality, you've just satiated your biological urge to take action without actually taking any physical risk.
And that's dangerous for a movement.
The research indicates this dynamic may have actively hindered physical mobilization in 2009. People felt they had done their part from the safety of their living rooms, so they didn't go out and risk getting beaten with a baton in the streets.
That is a wild, unintended consequence. Which makes me wonder, if the Western media falsely believed Twitter was fueling the 2009 protests, and the activists themselves were caught in this slacktivism dopamine loop, did that whole illusion actually inadvertently help the Iranian regime?
Oh, absolutely. It gave them the most valuable asset in any conflict, which is time.
Time to regroup.
Yes. The 2009 protests eventually fizzled out physically. The regime realized they had survived a massive stress test, but they didn't just sit on their hands. They spent the next several years studying the digital landscape and engineering a response.
So they adapted.
Big time. By the time the next major wave of unrest hit, they had moved away from clumsy brute force censorship and developed a highly sophisticated system scholars refer to as networked authoritarianism.
Right, because if we look at the economic protests in 2017 and 2018, the battlefield had completely changed by then.
Yes, very different landscape.
The messaging app Telegram now had 40 million Iranian users. That is a real critical mass, unlike the early Twitter days. And it was heavily utilized for leaderless mobilization.
And the state's response was far more surgical this time around. They didn't just try to arrest people, they went after the infrastructure itself.
They blocked Telegram.
First temporarily and then permanently. This forced citizens into a literal cat-and-mouse game where they had to use circumvention tools like Tor and virtual private networks or VPNs just to communicate.
Okay, I need to stop you there because this is where the technical side usually loses me.
Sure, let's break it down.
I understand blocking a website URL. You just tell the internet provider, hey, don't let anyone go to this web address.
Yeah.
But if millions of people are using VPNs, which, as I understand it, encrypt your traffic in a secure tunnel, how does the government block a specific app like Instagram? I just don't get how the state sees through that encryption to know what you're doing.
It's a great question. That is where the military college research details the deployment of deep packet inspection, or DPI.
DPI, okay.
It's a brilliant, if terrifying, technology. Think of a VPN like the Postal Service. You put your data in a blank steel envelope. The government cannot open the envelope to read your letter.
Right, it's secure.
But with deep packet inspection, they don't need to read the letter. They just weigh the envelope, measure its exact dimensions, and look at the timing of when it was dropped in the mailbox.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The state figured out that Instagram's cryptographic certificates, the digital handshakes it uses to connect to the server, have a very specific shape and size.
So it leaves a unique footprint.
Exactly. Even wrapped in a VPN, that specific data packet looks distinct from, say, an email or a Google search. So the state's sensors just look for that specific shape zipping across the network, and they terminate it in transit. They snipe it out of the air without ever decrypting it.
That is chillingly smart. They are literally profiling the shadow of the data.
It is highly effective.
And then, during the 2019 protests over gasoline price hikes, they went from scalpels to a sledgehammer. The state executed a near-total nationwide internet shutdown through the telecommunication infrastructure company Gateway. They literally just flipped a master switch.
Yeah. That 2019 blackout wasn't just a panic move, though. The sources suggest it was essentially a proof of concept.
A test run.
Exactly. It proved they were ready to roll out their grand long-term project, which is the National Information Network, or the NIN. You'll also see it referred to in the documents as the Halal Internet.
Right. It's like they built a massive walled garden. But here's what I don't understand about that.
What's that?
If a modern government pulls the plug on the global internet, don't they immediately paralyze their own digital economy? How do they balance absolute censorship with the basic need for modern commerce to just function?
That is the exact engineering marvel of the NIN. It is a parallel domestic intranet. Over the course of a decade, the state forced vital domestic infrastructure. We're talking internal banking systems, hospital networks, utility grids, domestic e-commerce platforms. They forced all of it onto local servers hosted physically inside the country.
Ah, I see. So they severed the nervous system from the outside world, but kept the internal heartbeat going.
Precisely. They can throw a switch that completely decouples the country from the global web, silencing all international communication, while a citizen inside Iran can still transfer money to their landlord or order groceries online.
It removes the economic deterrent of an internet shutdown.
It does. But despite this incredibly advanced digital cage, the massive protests in 2022 prove that human civic mobilization will always try to find the cracks in the wall.
Which brings us to the Woman Life Freedom movement, triggered by the tragic death of Mahsa or Gina Amini in the custody of the morality police. And the scope of this was just massive. The documents state over 2 million citizens mobilized. The hashtag Mahsa Amini was tweeted over 284 million times.
Their unprecedented digital footprint.
But what I found fascinating in the academic papers was the psychological split in how people use different platforms during this time. They call it platform divergence.
Yeah, the mechanics of how the apps were built ended up dictating their political function. Instagram is fundamentally a visual medium.
Right, photos and videos.
So researchers noted it became an effective archive. Protesters use it for emotional, visceral tributes. They were actively reframing state violence with captions like, "For life, not death." It was deeply personal storytelling meant to sustain morale.
Meanwhile, Twitter, which is now X, served a completely different purpose. Because it's text-heavy and built for rapid information exchange, it became the analytical, transnational hub.
Yes, the bridge.
Exactly. This was the bridge to the outside world, where the Iranian diaspora took on the role of translators, taking local content and pushing it out to demand international human rights accountability from foreign governments.
But in the middle of this incredibly coordinated effort, the protesters ran into a massive, unexpected hurdle. And it didn't come from the Iranian regime.
Yeah, it came from Western tech companies, which just blew my mind when I read it.
It's a huge complication. Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, deployed content moderation algorithms that started automatically removing protest content.
Because the activists were chanting, "Death to Khamenei," referring to the supreme leader.
Right. And Meta's algorithms flagged and deleted those videos under blanket incitement to violence policies.
Which is such a perfect example of why relying on foreign corporate platforms is so dangerous for dissidents. You've got AI algorithms trained by engineers in California pattern-matching phrases to Western concepts of hate speech or interpersonal violence.
They completely lack the nuance.
Exactly. They lack the geopolitical context to understand that Death to Khamenei is a systemic anti-authoritarian protest chant, not a literal threat of violence against a neighbor. I mean, it's wild that a tech company's one-size-fits-all algorithm have actual geopolitical consequences. Isn't this a massive blind spot for Western platforms trying to govern global free speech from California?
It's an enormous blind spot. It's the ultimate irony, really. You have a Silicon Valley algorithm acting as an accidental censor for a theocracy.
Can't make it up.
And what really caused a controversy, as the sources point out, is that Meta had previously made explicit manual exceptions to this exact rule.
Oh, right, for Ukraine.
Yes. They allowed Ukrainian users to call for violence against Russian invaders. It highlights this glaring subjective disparity in how global free speech is governed by a handful of tech executives.
It exposes that blind spot perfectly. Activists are putting their lives on the line, but their ability to communicate is entirely at the mercy of opaque corporate moderation policies.
Which brings us to the truly dystopian landscape of 2025 and 2026.
Yeah, the current state of things.
The regime barely survived the 2022 unrest, so they clearly decided to finalize their absolute control mechanisms. Based on a UK government policy note from April 2025, Iran now employs 3,500 cyber battalions.
3,500.
Yes, and these are not just automated bot networks spamming propaganda. These are state-sponsored human trolls engaging in highly sophisticated social engineering.
And the mechanism they use is so devious. I was reading this, and it's crazy. They will start these seemingly innocent trends on X or Instagram, something like share a black and white photo of yourself to show solidarity, or tell us a funny story about your hometown.
And ordinary people participate, naturally wanting to feel connected to a movement.
Of course.
But they don't realize that regime agents are using paid API access to sweep up the metadata of everyone interacting with those viral posts. They take that innocent photo or that tiny detail about a hometown and cross-reference it against massive state databases.
Just to unmask them.
Exactly, to unmask the real identities of anonymous dissident accounts.
They literally weaponize human nature. And they're weaponizing benign everyday technology. Which brings us right back to the scenario we started with today. Activists are being tracked and arrested using geolocation data harvested from SMAP, which is essentially the Iranian equivalent of Uber Eats.
The integration of state surveillance into commercial apps creates this pervasive dragnet.
Just think about the psychological cost of that. If you know that your late-night food delivery app is recording your location, and the government has a backdoor into that data, doesn't that fundamentally change the psychological cost of even thinking about attending a protest?
It induces a profound chilling effect. Surveillance becomes invisible and ubiquitous. At that point, self-censorship isn't just fear. It becomes your default biological survival mechanism. You don't even think about attending a protest because your phone is basically an ankle monitor.
And when citizens tried to bypass this entire terrestrial infrastructure during the 2025 and 2026 real protests, which, by the way, were driven by crippling hyperinflation, they tried smuggling in Starlink satellite internet units.
Which is a great workaround, in theory.
Right. But the state had already adapted. They countered by deploying military-grade mobile satellite jamming equipment on trucks, driving them through neighborhoods to scramble the signals.
So we are now looking at a system the regional analyses call a tiered internet, or digital apartheid.
Digital apartheid.
Yeah. The state issues these special white SIM cards to regime loyalists, journalists, and officials. Those SIM cards grant full, unfiltered access to the global internet. You get YouTube, you get X, you get everything.
While the general public is given a completely throttled, heavily monitored, and restricted connection, it is exactly like creating VIP lanes on a highway.
That's a great analogy.
The regime loyalists get to drive the speed limit with tinted windows, while every normal citizen is stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic at a crawl, and the government has a GPS tracker glued to their dashboard, listening to the audio inside the car.
Right. And to force people into those monitored cars, so to speak, the state uses brutal economic coercion. They actively push citizens onto domestic apps, like a popular messaging app called Rubica.
How do they force them?
By making international data traffic up to 100% more expensive to purchase, while heavily subsidizing the domestic data. It's an economic tax on privacy. And the crucial detail is that those domestic apps, like Rubica, lack end-to-end encryption. The state has a direct, unhindered window into every single message, photo, and voice note sent.
But, human beings are relentlessly creative. When one door closes, they pry open a window.
I always do.
To survive this digital apartheid, citizens are innovating in spaces the government hasn't fully figured out how to lock down yet. I was amazed to read about what Iranian gamers are doing right now.
Oh, the Discord servers.
Yes. They're using Discord and even gathering inside in-game chat worlds like the lobbies of multiplayer video games to organize and bypass state monitors. They are literally plotting real-world civic resistance while their avatars are standing around in a digital fantasy world.
It is an incredible display of resilience, and honestly, it perfectly synthesizes the core takeaway from all the materials we've reviewed today. Digital networks are an inescapable double-edged sword.
Yeah, they really are.
On one side, they do provide the vital scaffolding for civil society to coordinate, to document human rights abuses in real time, and to build global solidarity. Gamers hiding in Discord lobbies is a perfect example of that unyielding human drive to connect.
But the edge facing the other way is much sharper.
Much sharper. The exact same technology hands authoritarian regimes unprecedented, historically unmatched tools. It gives them the architecture for total surveillance, highly sophisticated information warfare, and absolute social control.
It's bleak.
The academic consensus across all these documents is crystal clear.
Yeah.
True democratic transition requires much more than just digital networks.
You cannot download a revolution. It requires offline institutional design. It requires strategic, quiet political organization. And ultimately, it requires human beings taking actual physical risks in the real world.
Technology can amplify the desire for freedom, but it cannot substitute for the physical mechanics of systemic change.
That is a very sobering reality to arrive at. I mean, we started by looking at early social media as a simple megaphone. Then we watched an authoritarian state build a walled garden around it, learning how to inspect the very shape of encrypted data and ultimately moving toward white SIM cards and digital apartheid.
It's been a rapid, terrifying evolution.
It really has. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. If the next phase of networked authoritarianism involves creating completely localized, heavily surveilled, and entirely separate national internets, will we eventually see a world where the World Wide Web ceases to exist entirely? Will the global internet be replaced by a series of isolated digital fortresses where no outside information can ever penetrate and no cry for help can ever escape?